Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, also known as ETCG1 here on this channel. Yes, I did write the intro music. Thank you very much. This is a video response to the domestics versus import video that I put out not too long ago, and I'd actually meant to make this sooner, but just getting around to it now. Apologize for that. But I knew that it would spark a discussion. I'm glad it sparked a discussion, and I learned a lot through the whole process of this. In fact, I just went and reviewed some of the comments that you had left on that video. And I really appreciate you leaving comments. I do read the comments, it's just I don't respond to them directly anymore other than these videos. So I'm just going to generally lump a lot of those comments together here. One of the best points that I thought that was brought up by you was the fact that domestic vehicles aren't necessarily made domestically anymore. In fact, there's a lot of manufacturing that happens down in Mexico or up in Canada. There's always been some manufacturing going on up in Canada for the North American market. And I found that interesting that a lot of you pointed that out. And a lot of the imports are actually made in the States by manufacturers here. And a lot of that came about because of the tariffs that were set about sometime back in the 90s on imported vehicles. It used to cost you a lot more to get a vehicle here because they were imported from Japan, so you had to pay the import cost, and then they started making like huge taxes on this stuff, which made it more advantageous for those, well, Japanese car makes, I know for sure, and then I know some Germans have some stuff that's built down in Mexico also. It made it a lot more advantageous for them to produce things domestically than it would be for them to produce things overseas and then ship them over here. So once again, cost is the driving force here in a lot of these decisions. But I came up with, and I'll put a link in the description to this, a site that basically tells you how to tell the country of origin where a vehicle was made. I know a 1 and also now a number 4 is United States. Number 2 is Canada, I believe. I know J is Japan. In fact, that's the saying that we had about Hondas. If it starts with a J, it's okay. So if the VIN number starts with a J, then the vehicle was manufactured in Japan. Korea, I think, is K. W, I think, is Germany. And Z is Italy. I don't really run into too many Italian cars, so I don't see too many Z's. But if you want to know the country of origin where your vehicle was made, whether it's got a domestic badge on it, whether it's got, you know, a Japanese badge on it or a German badge on it, you can tell where it was made simply by looking at the first digit of the VIN number. So you might be surprised about what you actually find and where your vehicle was actually made. So country of origin, also a lot of you brought up that manufacturing these days is global. And that's extremely true, because the reality is like, let's take General Motors for instance. They don't make all the parts that go into that vehicle. They make certain parts that go into that vehicle, certain core components, but they farm out a lot of the other components to other manufacturers. So they don't manufacture each and every single part that goes into that vehicle. They go to somebody and they say, we need taillight assemblies. So they go to, say, Stanley for instance. Or the windshields, they go to Pittsburgh Plate and Glass, PPG. You'll see that in a lot of your windshields. And they say, we need windshields of these dimensions for this vehicle. We're gonna order X amount. And then they ship them to the factory, and the factory assembles the vehicle. So they don't necessarily manufacture every single component within there. So that's something else that's really worth mentioning in this argument, because my argument was based on the fact that there was so much that was spent on labor costs that there's not a whole lot that's left over for materials. So there's a little bit more to it than that. And then somebody in the comments, and I wish I could have found the comment or found the, you know, the direct comment to this, had actually listed out each and every, listed out the cost of what it costs to produce the vehicle domestically, what the labor cost was, what everything else was, and it was kind of a wash, which, you know, I thought was interesting. Because keep in mind, this is only a theory of mine. I don't have a whole lot of facts to back this up other than my personal experience with these vehicles. And I'm going to be honest, my everyday experience with being a technician pretty much ended around 2008-ish. So I've been kind of out of the loop for the past few years. I mean, sure, stuff comes through, but not at the same volume I used to do like every day. I was just, as a technician, just working, and I was familiar with a lot of what was out there. So my opinions are colored by that time period. Things have changed in that amount of time. Things change every year, every 6 months in the automotive industry. And we've often argued in some ways that being a doctor is easier than being a technician because the model year never changes. Ours changes every 6 months, and we have to deal with those changes. Enough about that, that's for another video, but I just wanted to speak to some of those points that you had made, and especially the ones about, you know, the vehicles that are domestic aren't necessarily made domestically, and the vehicles that are imported aren't necessarily imported anymore. And I'm of the opinion that I really like the Japanese imports of the 90s. I thought those were just well crafted, finely put together vehicles. The Germans, I think, also make a great car, but they also make some very cheap cars. And as far as domestics go, they make some of the coolest cars. They have some of the coolest styles. They bring things to the table. I think I talked about cup holders in the other video that other manufacturers don't necessarily have. So the innovations, I would say, start with the American market and the American car market. Speaking of which, a lot of you really like Fords. There weren't too many people defending GM. There were some that were defending them, but a really big number of you really like what Ford is doing. And I find that interesting because Ford actually went through their restructuring about 2 to 3 years before everybody else, before the recession hit. Ford was already on the ropes, and we thought Ford was going to go under. I think it was like 2003 or something like that. And they used to own Land Rover, and they ended up selling off Land Rover. They ended up selling off Jaguar, because I don't want to piss off Jeremy Clarkson there. It's like it's spelled. They sold those lines off and just basically started focusing on their brand. So they were already in the process of a restructure before everybody else lost it. And GM had to get bailed out, and Chrysler had to get bailed out by the US government. So those are our cars. For those of us living in the States, our tax dollars at work, keeping the auto industry going. But let's face it, if those industries would have failed, remember when I talked about they don't make every part of the vehicle? There would send out huge waves of economic destruction that would go along with that. And a lot of people with jobs in the not necessarily direct auto manufacturing market, like say they just made those taillights like I talked about, or those windshields, they would be affected if those car companies went under. They would also go under. So instead of just one giant company going down, you'd have several little bitty companies going down everywhere. And honestly, that would affect the supply chain across the board. Because even those import vehicles that are produced domestically, this gets confusing, they buy parts from these American companies too. So like you look on the back of a Honda, I know for a fact that those taillight assemblies are made by Stanley. And that's an American company. So, different. And one thing I do know about the Honda side of things, and I know them because I know them, I work for them, I know them better than anything. I hate to keep talking about it, but I know specifically about that. And I like to talk about things that I have some information on, like specific information. I don't like to talk about things and speculate. But as far as the way Honda manufacturing worked, from my recollection, early on in Honda's development, they would go into one of these companies that they would have produce these parts for them and virtually take them over. They had quality standards that were virtually unrealistic. They had some really high expectations when they walked into these places, and they said, you will make part this way. And they practically took over these companies and made them part of their umbrella. And as a result, they had really great quality, but man, they did piss off a lot of their vendors as a result of that. And there was some backlash to that, you know, and obviously cost cutting through those smaller companies had to come into play and everything else. So I think that's part of the reason why the technology shifted. I don't necessarily want to say slipped, but let's just say that the quality level was not as good moving forward because they didn't have that same philosophy. And honestly, they couldn't afford to. I mean, you can't just walk into somebody's company and say, you know, just because you're making this for us, we pretty much own you now. I mean, yeah, you're helping to pay and keep the lights on and everything, but I mean, this is not a dictatorship. It's capitalism. Come on, people, you got to work together. Shifting gears again, a lot of you like the Fords. I'm going to start looking at those. A lot of you like the Fusions, the Fiestas, those kinds of things. And I'm not really sure what they're called over in Europe. I know Mondeo maybe, I think is the same thing that we call a Fusion here. And it's interesting because I've actually always kind of looked at Ford as sort of an English company. It was starting in American, all that kind of thing, but it just seemed like Ford just had a lot of English philosophies to it, which I find interesting, and I'm not really sure why I mentioned it. So I think that covers the bullet points of what I got from your comments, and I really appreciate the comments that you left, and I appreciate any comments that you leave to this video that is a response to those comments in the original video, Domestics versus Imports. Anyway, I am Eric the Car Guy, also known as ETCG1 on this here channel. You can find me on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter, and always at ericthecarguy.com. Where you can ask your automotive questions should you so desire. You can either use the search function or you can head over to the forum, and that's honestly where I focus my attention on answering automotive questions. So if you're leaving comments, know that I am reading them, but if you're needing to ask questions, head to ericthecarguy.com. We'll all get along. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Catch you next time. See ya.